That my one?
Yeah.
Oh, beautiful.
Okay, so what do you do at Phyto Labs?
Cyto Labs.
Sort of sad.
That's what I thought too. We're a chromosomal analysis and research facility. So we mainly work with the pathology industry. Most of our clients are IVF clinics. So generally we do a lot of the screening work for cytogenetic abnormalities that might be causing infertility for the patients that we deal with. And then our other major area of work is with miscarriages. So we look at generally the first trimester miscarriage for chromosomal abnormalities that is the cause of the miscarriage.
Yeah.
So research-wise,
what are you focused on at the moment?
At the moment, in terms of our research,
Yeah, like the biggest focus.
our biggest area is the miscarriage research. So we have one of the biggest data sets in the world, published data sets in the world in that area. What we're trying to move towards is understanding why the levels of male miscarriage or normal male miscarriage is higher than normal females. So our overall data set shows that about 83% of abnormalities are caused by chromosomal abnormalities, and then the percentage of males to females is about 3 times higher. And so we want to get to the point that we understand why that's occurring.
Right.
Yeah.
And so you're working with mice models?
No,
A fair bit, wasn't it?
the mice models that I've worked with are in liver cancer research.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And the reason that we work with mice, particularly with the cell models, is because it was very hard to get human cell models growing and culturing for ongoing use. We've now had further breakthroughs in the area, so that we do have human models now.
Yeah.
But because I've been more focused on my Ph.D. and writing it up.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I haven't been working so much with that area at the moment. So
your PhD is dragging on a bit?
yes, that happens. It's a common thing. And so I have been writing up for a fair period of time in that stage, and I'm currently having it finally reviewed by somebody that's helping out with some final editing before it goes through. So, yeah.
So, what are your thoughts about the genomic big data bank for brain cancer and treating glioblastoma? As has been in the news sort of recently with the Charlie Teo Foundation.
In the small amount of understanding that I have, and listening to Charlie talk, I think that he's right in terms of being able to redirect what has been a normal perspective of how we deal with cancer. We do understand that brain cancer is obviously a more complicated case as an overall perspective.
From a histology perspective, or like a causative perspective, or the rate of growth and
the variability in the cells is the main issue. And if you have something like chronic myeloid leukemia, where we have a known translocation, we can target with a 922, which creates the BCR-ABL oncogene. And because we know that exists and it occurs for such a large percentage of patients, we can really target in on that. And that's why we've had, in that particular area, good breakthroughs, because we can really get into that targeting.
But that's more molecular, right?
Yeah. Well, it's molecular, then leads into biochemical pathways, and when it's doing one thing all the time, we can then say, well, all these cells do this, and because they do this, we can target it in this manner. If you've got massive heterogeneity within a cell population, you might hit 70% of it by going one way, but now how do we do with the other 30%? And even if we just leave 1% of those cells behind, they continue to proliferate, and then we can't target them specifically, then they're going to take over, and they may be the worst. So in some ways, when we target, we can actually cause more of a problem because it can set off other cell types or create a strengthening of that lineage of the cancer as well. So bringing it back to brain cancer, I think that the heterogeneity of most brain cancers make it very, very hard to target. So we have to think wider and in new ways, and maybe even create a new paradigm of how we think about cancer. Maybe the breakthrough in that area. Listen to Charlie. I think that we do have to step outside the box to find a new way to deal with it, because I don't think that we're making major moves forward in that area. I don't know a huge amount about specific brain cancers or brain cancer overall. I would never say that I'm an expert in it. I've had some involvement and interest in it over time. So, I would never speak as an expert, but that's just my overall perspective, dealing with cancer and doing cancer research myself.
Yeah.
So, and being in medical science for over 20 years, you see these sorts of mindsets occurring.
Yeah.
And I do think that we need to break away. I didn't know whether immunotherapy and some of the thoughts within immunotherapy might be the answer. I know that Charlie suggested that he didn't think that it was going that way. I know that there's some studies that are having some results around the world at the moment.
Yeah.
I know one in particular, MD Anderson. I don't know too much about it, but that's and you got to be open-minded about what's going on all over the place as well, because something that's actually already in process may be the answer as well. Like we may not have to restart the ball rolling.
Yeah.
If there's something that's providing us with some good answers now as well.
I think it's just interesting, the statistics, when we look at the health of just Australians in general, and I go to the global health evaluation metric, IHME, and so dysfunctions and cancers and disabilities, they're all sort of listed, in incidence and diagnoses and prevalence and whatever else, and so we have a decline in things like HIV, in pancreatic cancer, acute causes of death, from cancers are dropping.
In some areas. In some areas,
yes. So, but then when you look at neurological dysfunction, headache disorders, like cerebral ataxia, falls. So, deaths due to falls, that's a brain dysfunction, and,
It's 1 o'clock.
But so there is a lot more happening with the brain that is causing the federal government money. But interestingly, we get in brain research the smaller slice of the pie. And to me, tell me what you think a healthy brain is.
Well, I think any part of the body needs to be thought about holistically rather than specifically. And I think that many things that relate to the body, to the spirit and to the mind are going to be influencing the mind, and I think that we always need to think about our health in that manner.
Do you consider the brain and the mind as separate entities?
Yes, I would say so, and I don't. My definition would be the brain is what sits inside our head.
So the physical structure?
Yes, and obviously has functions related to that brain structure, but I do believe that there is our mind does involve the brain, but we have the ability to reach
the
outside.
Secretion of neurotransmitters via, environmental, through stress, through shock, through trauma, whatever. So,
Yeah. And so where I extend outside the brain is going into more of a spiritual realm, I suppose, where I believe that intuition and a lot of creative thoughts actually comes from beyond the mind. From beyond the brain, but is considered to be, from my perspective, the mind. And that's where I use two different terms, but I do understand that everybody has a different idea of what a word is. So that would be my definition.
Well, I consider the brain and the central nervous system. So the brain, the brain, the spinal column, your CSF. The central nervous system innervates the entire body. So when people think about brain health and I ask them about it, first of all, they're thinking, why should I care? Well, a healthy brain necessarily has, a great speed of synaptic transmission. You've got good reaction times, you're enjoying movement in your body, you've got good gait, you've got good posture, you've got good rate of force development, and these are the things that I find in my practice which are declining alarmingly in younger populations. And so headache disorders, dementia, like I said, death by falls, things like that, they're dysfunctions of the brain. And so neurological dysfunctions are the fastest growing disabilities in Australia. And so why are we not looking at the brain more intensely?
And what's affecting the brain?
And what's affecting the brain, yeah, absolutely. And, you know, Monsanto, obviously, you know, earlier this year, there was, what, a $3 billion payout to a couple that had been affected. You know, they won in court in the US. Tell me you read it.
I haven't read that particular paper. I know of a big research paper that came out about 10 years ago, and they were looking at studies of with the corn, and they were looking at because they were generally spraying Roundup on the corn, and they genetically modified the corn to be able to handle the Roundup, but the Roundup was entering the corn obviously in supposedly safe levels, but the rat models showed that both the genetic alteration and the Roundup and a combination of both was, you know, the incidence of cancer were much
and then you have the cross reactivity with foods, and so you're not just eating corn, you know, you might
we are dealing with very complex modelling, and this is where maybe the data set starts to show the difference. It's very hard for me to turn around and sue Monsanto for my cancer because I ate corn, because what else have I done in my life? It's very hard to target that and make them take responsibility for it, because it's easy to walk away and say, well, you've done a million other things in your life, and are we talking about them as well? And this is where the complex modelling might open up the thought process to, okay, we know that you've done all these things in your life, but we know by our correlations that this is one that has a high correlation with this particular type of cancer, and then we have something very meaningful for it. The issue that I see is that we have a lot of understanding about what causes cancers and why we have cancers, but we're not stopping what we're doing. We want somebody to give us an out. So it's like, I've got liver cancer, I've been drinking my whole life heavily, and now that I've got liver cancer, I want you to cure me. And
without realising the complexity of what it takes to... it's like people think a lung transplant, oh, well, if I'm a smoker, I'll just go and get a new lung or whatever. It's sort of understating the...
and it's not taking responsibility, and I think that we have to look at this from a cultural level, where our culture overall is that we want our rights, we want what's supposed to be for us, yet we won't take responsibility. And I think that that is underpinning so much of the problems within our society overall, and we can easily translate that into what we're talking about in terms of cancer. They want cure for lung cancer when they've been smoking their whole life. You know,
well, let's promote what we love rather than bash what we hate.
Yes, and I appreciate that as well. But we do need to take responsibility for ourselves and what we do, what we put into our bodies and the lifestyles that we lead, if we want to have a long, healthy lifestyle. And so we have to look at prevention rather than cure. And maybe, as you said, in the imbalance of money spent in cancer research, maybe we need to understand why we're not making the step.
Lifestyle modification, which can be so simple. It's like, you know, one of the easiest ways to start off a fitness program isn't to join a gym, it's to point your sneakers in the direction of the front door, like the evening before. And then when you wake up, it's like these really, really small steps.
Yep.
And so one of the things that I find, you know, when people say, oh, you know, I'm an Olympic weightlifting trainer, you know, I treat people with neurodegenerative diseases, and like, oh, I don't want to go to the gym. Well, actually, it's not about going to the gym. You're problematizing something that is actually really, really simple. It's like if I ask you, oh, would you like to go for dinner? You'd be like, yeah, sure. But when you ask a client or an athlete, oh, would you like to train? Oh, well, like, you know, I've got to find a park, and you know, I have to pack my backpack, and so
it becomes a complex scenario for them. And so they make a story out of it that may or may not be relevant to reality. And as you said, when we can make things simple, then our ability to step onto the first step is much greater than looking up the staircase. And I definitely appreciate that. I just don't know. I don't think that we have an answer to it right now. And maybe we need to look a bit deeper into how do we translate the knowledge that we have about our lifestyle. And, you know, so we know generally why we have a lot of issues. We need to translate that knowledge into action that does change our lifestyle. And I've never found I believe, a true proven method that will work for everybody. Whether we ever will, I don't know, but we need to get from knowledge into action. So the problem,
I think from knowledge comes empowerment, but also there needs to be some intrinsic motivation.
Correct.
And